Great. Good to go.
Wonderful. Welcome one and all to the October 26th installment of UIDRB. Our next meeting, what you could remind everyone, our next meeting, I think it would be on Thanksgiving, which is obviously not. Is it the prior week?
It is Monday, November 20th.
Okay, that is our next meeting.
Yes.
Would the city staff please raise your right hand? You swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do, Stephanie Hensler, Planning Division.
Thank you very much. Would you call the roll, please?
Certainly. Mr. Fleming is not here. Ms. Gunzelman?
Present.
Ms. Jones?
Here.
Ms. Parker?
Here.
Mr. Reeds?
Here.
Mr. Sublette?
Here.
And Mr. Smansky.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Lovely. Is there anyone here who would like to address the board before we? Right next.
Debbie, next. Okay. You're your own agenda item.
No one else? Okay. Did anyone,
Minutes.
yes, did everyone have an opportunity to review those minutes from last month? Any review?
I think we have her next.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
We have
Up next.
Was she next?
Yes.
Oh, okay, okay.
I got Mary.
No, sorry.
Hello.
Hello. Do I need to swear her in? I'd kind of like to.
Promise to tell the truth.
I'm just kidding.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Fenning. I am a Deputy Director in the Department of Development, and I am here on behalf of Director Mike Stevens and Planning Administrator Mark DeVellis to wish you a happy National Community Planning Month. We didn't want to let this opportunity go by without thanking you for the work you do, the time commitment that you put in, the thoughtfulness that you bring to these meetings and these opportunities. This board represents a range of skill and experience, and having collectively, you've served on this board between 1 and 6 years each. And there's so much growth happening in the University District, and your work is a testament to what's going on there. This year alone, this board has overseen at least 79 applications for COAs and issued 53 of them. Together, this work is valued at least 43,000 square feet of commercial space and 568 residential units for a combined investment of about $35 million. And that makes such a difference when you look at our potential to create opportunity in our community by creating jobs that goes into the commercial space that we create, by creating housing at every price point. It affects our community's ability to accept new residents and to grow and develop and change. And I really just want to thank you for being instrumental in that change and helping to preserve the quality of the built environment as we grow and change. So on behalf of all of us in the department, thank you for the work you do on behalf of our residents in our city.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennifer. And Mark.
On that remarkably happy note, everyone did have an opportunity to look at the meeting minutes, no changes. Would you like to call the roll, please?
Certainly.
Thank you.
Ms. Gunzelman?
Yes.
Did I get a
Make a
vote?
motion. Make a motion.
Yeah.
I move to approve. I second.
Okay, now Ms. Gunzelman.
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Jones?
Yes.
Ms. Parker?
Sustain.
Mr. Reeds?
Yes.
Mr. Sublette?
Yes.
And Mr. Smansky?
Yes.
Motion carries.
I believe we're ready to get started, are we not? Which brings us to UID 23-10-004, 1980 North High Street.
Come forward.
What, yeah, she'll do a review then, but if you'd like to come forward now, that's fine.
Okay. UID 23-10-004 for 1980 North High Street. The applicant is requesting a recommendation on a variance for code section 3325.341 section D building design standards to allow the area of a window on a primary building facade between 2 feet and 10 feet to be 100% opaque. The submitted materials include the BZS application and then the COA and stamped drawings from when they were here previously. The proposal was previously reviewed and conditionally approved by the UIDRB in July of 2023. The applicant satisfied the outstanding condition and the certificate of approval was issued in August. While they were submitting for permit, the applicant discovered that they needed the aforementioned variance. The requested variance is consistent with the design reviewed and approved by the board. As such, staff encourages the board to support the request and recommend approval for the variance.
Wow, okay. Do you have any, would you like to run through quickly the,
Certainly. So this is the application they submitted for the variance. And just as a reminder, this is the PNC, the ATM, where they were moving it from the vestibule to the outside of the building. The condition that had been placed on it was that there was some additional lighting that was removed, so some out here. So this is its future state. And what has caused the variance, and then here's just the COA showing that what they're asking for variances for is the same thing that we approved. They just didn't know they needed the variance at the time. And these are the drawings that we stamped in the COA we issued.
okay?
Motion to approve.
Yeah, second.
I'm sorry,
Motion to approve.
do I hear a second?
I second.
Right, that was a,
Well, before we go there, is there,
yes.
is there anything you'd like to add? I do need to swear you in before you speak, but if there is something you'd like to add, that you're certainly welcome to.
Don't need to take up too much of your time on something like this, but
Do you swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
yes, I do.
Proceed.
Just pointing out that the existing condition has, I believe, 55% full transparency of glass, and the new condition would not be reducing that in any capacity. It'd just be changing out one of the opaque glass panels for an opaque material for the ATM for security purposes of things that are happening in that vestibule. That's really the crux of what they're trying to accomplish.
Okay. Before there are motions, are there any questions on the part of any board members?
Can I make a comment, or actually it's like a report from the University Area Commission? This came up before the commission in September, was approved. Yes, it's right, September? Yes, I think so, or the last one. Was approved unanimously with no sorts of comments from the public.
Okay. Now do we hear a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Call the roll, please.
So originally it was Ms. Parker seconded originally to,
Oh,
here we go.
If she can, Ms. Parker can second.
Thank you.
Thank you. I need that second.
Thank you. All right. Ms. Gunzelman,
Yes.
Ms. Jones?
Yes.
Ms. Parker?
Yes.
Mr. Reeds?
yes.
Mr. Sublette?
Yes.
And Mr. Smansky?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Lovely. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Which takes us to UID 23-10-006, 1288 North High Street.
Okay. $1288 North High Street. The applicant is requesting review and approval of a new 5.5 foot by 3 foot oval internally illuminated projecting sign with exposed neon for the submitted drawings. The submittal includes sign detail and a site plan. These two pages here. Let's see the size, the mounting details, its location. And then here is the location on the front of the building. Here's High Street.
Where are we again, Stephanie? I'm sorry, what's the intersecting street?
King and High,
King and High.
I think, right?
Six.
Little, yeah.
Yes, this is six.
Just, it's like that when we're weird. It used to be a brewery, it's right next to the Kroger,
Okay.
I think.
I just know it's not good.
So after review, the proposal is generally consistent with the University District Plan. The plan recommends that new signage be a logical and complementary component of the overall storefront, not permanently alter historic building materials and include a simple message. The University District Plan also notes a preference for projecting signs and specifies a minimum clearance of 10 foot from grade, overall size of 6 square foot per side, with lettering between 4 inches and 10 inches, and that signs should not project more than 6 feet. The application is consistent with these recommendations, with the exception of the overall size, which is why I couldn't staff approve it. As proposed, the sign is 16.5 square feet per side. Despite being larger than the plan recommendation, staff supports the proposal as it is appropriately sized for the building and location. Staff recommends approval.
Is the applicant here?
Yes.
Would you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Do you have anything you'd like to add to the city's review of the proposal?
I don't think so. I'm happy to answer questions if you have any. I mean, we did already make some adjustments based on making sure that we comply as much as possible. We just felt like the sign that was there before, the North High Brewing sign, was actually larger than this, so we thought this would be
Was it a
fine.
blade sign as well?
Yes.
Okay.
I just have one question. Usually we ask that the bolts are covered. It looks like in this graphic, they're exposed. I don't know if the applicant was given models of what's typical, but in all past blade signs that I've been part of the approval process, we've asked that they cover that piece of hardware.
Okay.
So it's that.
We are planning on reusing the existing, where the existing plate is.
Right.
So I'll just see what we can do to cover it. We told the landlord we would not make any additional holes in the brick.
Right.
So I'll just have to see. That's interesting because the previous one doesn't look like the bolts are covered, but we can see what we can do to cover them.
Mhm.
You're thinking like what,
The
like,
last one we've approved, but I'm trying to think about other examples in the nearby area that would give you a model for that.
yeah, that would be helpful to know like what you're looking for, how you want us to.
Is that not in the guidelines, Steph? It doesn't
What's in
specify
the
that.
first?
So that-
Not that I'm familiar with.
It doesn't really bother me as long as they're maybe painted black.
To match the plate, you
Yeah,
mean?
to match the plate. I would be fine with that. But I don't think it would distract too much, given the height of it, but
Mhm.
Are we making, either covering or painting out conditional approval for this approval?
No, I mean, I would approve it as is. I'm just raising it for recognition of consistency of what we've done in the past.
Sure.
And, for your point, version 2, it wouldn't hurt to look and see what you see in the area. But I remember many discussions with Frank about this. He had expertise in this technology. And I don't remember if it was that keeping them covered keeps them from loosening. It's not inconceivable that a kid's gonna come along with a basketball and start throwing it at that sign. And I think it's just, the covering of the hardware is just a point of safety for you guys. It protects it.
Yeah, I mean, we don't typically have an issue with uncovered bolts coming off. But if it's more of an aesthetic thing, then I would just,
It's so high up that I'm less worried about it aesthetically in this case. I just
Yeah.
think consistency is better in general from the point of view of what we do.
okay. So,
But I would support as is. I'm not raising this as a condition for approval.
okay, so you'd be okay if we at least paint them to match the plate, you'd be okay with that? Okay.
I motion to approve. Is that okay? Do we have any other questions? I'm sorry. Am I moving that too fast? Okay.
Second.
Okay.
But the motion should have the caveat that the
The
bolts
filter.
Painted
Painted
black.
black,
Yeah. Okay, so I motion to approve with the condition that the bolts are painted black or to match the
Plate.
color, the
Okay.
plate. Thank you for that.
Sure.
Who's second?
A second, I accept the changes.
Okay, so I have a motion by Ms. Parker for conditional approval with the condition being that the bolts are painted to match the plate, and that was seconded by Mr. Smansky, correct?
Correct?
Okay. Ms. Gunzelman,
Yes.
Ms. Jones,
Yes.
Ms. Parker,
Yes.
Mr. Reeds,
Yes.
Mr. Sublette,
Yes.
and Mr. Smansky.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would be decisions. I'm gonna keep my eye out.
Which brings us to UID 23-10-005, 82, 96, 102, 104 East 16th Avenue.
Okay. All right, UID 23-10-005 for 82, 96, 102 to 104 East 16th Ave. The applicant is seeking conceptual review for the construction of a new residential building. The proposal includes the demolition of several potentially contributing buildings on the sites, construction of a new 6-story residential building with amenity space, terraces, stoops, tall first floor glazing, street trees, and parking on a proportion of the first 2 levels. The submission includes a massing study. I'll go through that really quickly, it's just a couple of pages, and then we'll finish up with that report. If you all will recall, at the last meeting, it was suggested to the applicant that they go back and review these things. So they did that. That's why we're seeing much less detail this time around. And they're providing 2 different scenarios for the review and discussions. So this is the first one. Essentially, this one is, it's 345 beds. I know someone asked about parking. I think parking is staying the same. The applicant can confirm that. This scenario, that third duplex is going away and they're keeping a tree here. And then here's the kind of more ground level view from 16th of that scenario. And then here is kind of from the fork in the road. And then scheme number 2 keeps that third duplex, but we lose a tree here. And then the massing is just a little bit different. And then you have those 2 perspectives. So the proposal came before the UIDRB in July, August, and September. At the most recent meeting, the board stated that the applicant should reevaluate the massing and consider the taller portion of the building being either in the center or along wall deck with lower heights along 16th Ave. The board also encouraged the applicant to explore a scenario where the third duplex is maintained and noted that removal of the mature tree along 16th Avenue could be supported if it resulted in a higher quality building design. Upon review, the applicant has provided 2 massing options for board review. As previously noted, the recommended land use for the site is institutional. However, staff notes that these properties are generally surrounded by parcels recommended for higher intensity residential. The plan does provide guidance on adaptively reusing institutional sites. As such, staff could support a higher intensity residential development on this site if the proposal is consistent with plan recommendations. The plan recommends that new construction be compatible with the surrounding neighborhood in terms of size and scale. The revised options are somewhat consistent with this recommendation. While the proposal is more intense than the current use, staff understands the transitional nature of the site. Each option steps back into the neighborhood differently. In scheme 1, a larger portion of the building has been reduced to 4 stories along the eastern property line as a transition from the development to the lower intensity portion of the neighborhood. In scheme 2, there's a smaller 4-story step down in addition to the third duplex being kept as part of the transition along East 16th. Further, the portions of the building along East 16th Avenue in scheme number 2 appear more consistent with the scale of the other buildings along this frontage as opposed to the wider elements in option 1. The plan also recommends the preservation of contributing structures. The buildings on site are potentially contributing. Both options result in the demolition of the church building and adaptive reuse of several significant architectural features. However, scheme 2 preserves the duplex at 102 to 104 East 16th, which staff supports. The University District Plan also recommends open space preservation be a primary consideration for redeveloping proposals to conserve as much open space and mature trees on site as possible, and that multifamily buildings include stoops, porches, balconies, and other features to ensure they contribute to the street. Both schemes maintain some green space on the site and several mature trees. However, option 1 maintains the mature tree on East 16th. For either option, staff encourages the applicant to consider a redesign of the porch elements to be more residential in nature and less like building overhangs. In summary, both schemes are generally consistent with the plan, although scheme 2 is more so due to the ability to maintain most of the mature trees and green space, additional element of preservation, and more consistent massing along East 16th. Moving forward, staff recommends the applicant continue to take the University District Plan recommendations regarding building and site design, materials, lighting, landscaping, and parking into consideration as the design continues to develop, The applicant should be mindful of the applicable land use standards and engage with Department of Building and Zoning Services to identify any needed variances. Thank you.
Thank you. Whoever's going to address the board, raise their right hand, please. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? You do. You have anything you'd like to add to the city's review, the updated submission?
No, I think they always do a great job.
Okay. Is there anyone from the visiting public that would like to address this case? Yes? We'd like to do that now or after. I think we do that before we open it up for board. Would you like to step forward, please?
Speak.
Sure, that's fine.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Susan Keeney, Preservation Director at Columbus Landmarks and a resident of the University District and also a former member of the University Area Commission, a triple threat. I'll begin with remarks on behalf of Columbus Landmarks. Columbus Landmarks is very supportive of the adaptive reuse of historic structures. We encourage it. But this project is not adaptive reuse. The stained glass and wood, all materials that are being saved is good, but the integrity of the beautifully designed interior space is lost. As you might guess, we've not changed our opinion on this. Now I'd like to move to speaking not on behalf of Columbus Landmarks, but just as a former member of the University Area Commission who worked on the University District Plan from start to finish. I'm probably not highlighting things you don't already know, but I think they bear mentioning. We worked on the plan for a very long time, several years, and it was a few more years after or before the commercial overlay was adopted into code. The plan is not perfect. There are things we missed and things I wish we could change. However, even with a few flaws, what remains is valid and true for today, and it is the goals and the vision of the plan. We were guided by planning staff, Mark Dervillis, Kevin Wheeler, and Vince Tufsadero. And, I told Mark I was going to give him a shout out, but he left. We knew the University District would grow, so an important goal of the plan was to guide anticipated development along the commercial corridors. It made good sense to allow increased height and density along those corridors. But an equally important goal was to prevent the increased growth and development from filtering into the lower density or residential neighborhoods. We believed it was important to reduce development pressures there in order to enhance and strengthen the character of these neighborhoods. Boundaries were established. I'm so sorry. Boundaries were established. Pearl Street on the east and Wall Street on the west. I know planners like straight lines, but these boundaries made good sense to all of us, and they still do. A former BZA member used to describe variances as a relaxation of the code. Even with the setbacks to the east and the building presented today is overall a 6-story building, or it reads as a 6-story building and is still out of scale with the adjacent neighborhood. I may shoot myself in the foot here, but we may lose a building and a real gem of an interior space. But it should not be replaced with a building that overpowers and does not contribute to or enhance the unique character of this neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. I asked, and I think I already forgot. Do you have anything you'd like to add to the city's?
I think that's a silly question. In all seriousness. Well, thank you again for your time. We appreciate being here. And we did take to heart the comments and suggestions in terms of going back and looking at the building massing again, and that's what drove us to this. And I appreciate the ability to kind of step back, not worry about architecture at the moment, but look at the primary issues of concern, which has really boiled down to, the density on the site, density and height and such. So what we ended up doing is we looked at the first scheme. There's can you put it, I'm sorry, page 2 in that, because that has the plans on there, both the models. I think it's helpful to see both.
Is that page 2?
The one that's got both.
Page 2.
It's this page.
Where's the page?
Well, while she's looking, I mean, it's fine if that's the one you got handy. The point that I wanted to make was that we looked at the site as we have been looking at it, which was basically taking down the residential property to the east. And we looked at a different massing study to specifically address the concerns about the frontage of the building on 16th and Waldeck Avenues. And so what we ended up doing is basically stair stepping the building. There you go. Perfect. Thank you very much. So the top scheme is on the top right is scheme 1. That's the one that does retain the building to the east and also the tree. And I will make a point, Carrie, I did go up to Worthington Thomas. I live in the Worthington area, so it's not that hard. But I looked at those trees that are being preserved out there along the street frontage. And those trees are much bigger.
Yeah, very big.
They're monumental trees without a doubt.
Yeah.
But the amount of land that they were using or taking to protect those trees during construction was phenomenal.
Yeah.
It's very significant. So to your point, I'm not sure any one of these schemes would really be able to save that tree because of the proximity of the root base to the construction of the building. So I think that's something that we do have to consider because if you use that as an example, and whether it's a fair example or not, it's a real example. Saving those trees would probably require you to cut out at least maybe 25% of the site just for the sake of preserving it during construction. So that's something that I think we have to recognize in terms of, is that practical? Is it reasonable to try to look at? This scheme shows it there because that's what was consistent with the first scheme that we showed on this. But the whole idea here was to step down the building. We looked at the massing on the northern side and kept, the height of the building there. And then just looked at an artful way. I know there's still a lot of work because this is concept. Of stepping the building down as it went around the corner and addressing the corner specifically, working the height of the mass of the building down as the building went eastward. The lower site, or lower scheme, I'm sorry, scheme 2, is with retaining the existing residential to the east, but still trying to get the same yield out of the site, because you all are in the industry, you understand the economic development nature in terms of, trying to make things work. And that has to be part of the conversation here because we do have a landowner, in this case, it's the church, that is looking to, maintain the value of their property for preservation of their church in terms of what they do with that, in their future needs. So the scheme 2, we lost the tree in that particular scheme. And the building does end up to be a little bit more massy. I think that's the thing that kind of needs to jump out at people. We took the cues of potentially keeping the site, or keeping the residential building, but getting more mass on the site in retaining that building. So we did that, and to some degree, it's a little bit of a comparison because I think it's important to note that the first scheme seems to go in the direction of accomplishing the massing concerns relative to the frontage of 16th and Waldeck. Whereas the scheme 2 accomplishes the goal of retaining the property to the east, but it gets away from the massing considerations. So I think therein lies probably one of the main conversation points, moving forward for today. Because it's not an either or, it's one or the other kind of scenario here. We're trying to, come up with the right appropriate scheme that fits the site, but also accommodate the concerns from the board in terms of speaking about architectural massing and density and such. So from one thing I do want to make a note, because they made a note about the parking and the difference between the two schemes. The first scheme does retain the original amount of parking, which was 95 spaces. The second scheme, because of the reduced footprint, we lose that parcel, so we lose 40 feet plus the setback that we would have to still provide on the remaining piece of the property. So we effectively lose about 50 to 55 feet on that church site by itself. So that reduction in buildable land significantly hurts the footprint of the building, and truthfully, it cuts our parking in about half. And that's a problem, for everybody. I think, there's obvious concerns about parking throughout the board and in the area. So I do think that I don't want to weigh the whole thing on parking, but if you look at a pros and cons conversation relative to the two schemes, one of the cons to keeping that property is that the buildable area goes down significantly. And one of the biggest sacrifices in that scenario is parking. We can get the units and bed counts to where it needs to be from an economic development side of things. But there's part of that project that doesn't work, and that's the parking side of things. So, I think all in all, as we've gone through, these various different meetings, and, we did a quick summary here just for our own sake in terms of the things that have been discussed, the things that have been mentioned, by community and by, the board members here, is that we feel that we've really addressed all of the issues, and we're kind of at that point where we really need to move forward on the concept stage of things. As designers, and I know there's several of them here, you can design all day and you can keep going through that treadmill aspect of repeating, seeking, finding. But we've done a lot of work on the site, and we've looked at what we think is reasonable to get on the site. And I think looking at it from a standpoint of economics, which is the church's perspective, scheme A, or one in this case, sorry, is really by far our preference. And I know the compromise to that is the residential building, but in lieu of the residential building, we're able to get the other things in the project that are, I'll say, equally as important. Equally being, retaining the green space, addressing the massing on the both frontage of 16th and Waldeck, and also addressing the parking issues. The frontage side on that corner, that's something that we all agree, and we intentionally made some design change to make that the front, because that does really address things from a pedestrian perspective. It's an odd shaped corner, it's not square. So I think looking at the handful of things, because that's really what it's boiled down to, because we really haven't gotten into the architecture. So the handful of things are these items that we've been talking about here, which is size, massing, scale, house, and parking, in short.
Step down, green space, trees.
Yeah, it's a great space and trees and all. So I think from a perspective of, trying to accomplish as many of the goals and objectives as we can, that the scheme one really seems to do that. And I understand, the compromise of, raising an existing structure. But in light of trying to accomplish the bigger picture, I think scheme one is the more appropriate solution for this site. That being said, I would certainly like to hear, unless Dave, I got you, Dave, here. You have any comments on, or want to add anything in particular?
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of going back to, sort of the church, and I mean, the highest and best use to provide maximum value to the church for them to further their mission is student housing on the site. And, every time we take a scalpel to it and try to, and I mean, to your guys' credit, I mean, I do think it looks great. It lowers value to what we can pay, or to what anybody can pay the church for the land. So just wanted to kind of get that on the record, that it is impactful from a value, and for just, I think it's obvious, but that is the case. But yeah, I mean, said it pretty well. We're trying to do our best to listen to you all, come back, take our notes, have John's team sort of, package, take your vision and put it on screen as best we can. But we're, these transactions, developments don't happen in a vacuum. We need to kind of make something happen.
And one thing I would add to that value side, is it's just not them. They are obviously very interested in the site and want to be in this market. But from a pure business side of things, they can't build things any cheaper than anybody else. Their rent rate for a unit or a bed has to be within the market. They can't go above the market, because then they are pricing themselves out, which doesn't make any sense. So no matter who's at the table here looking at a particular site, they're going to be faced with the same particular issues. So I think getting to an acceptable solution that we all can work with, I think, is what's really on the agenda for today. And I do think that looking at the scheme one, option one, is the one that we should really be focusing on, because that does checked the most boxes in terms of trying to accommodate the concerns that we've all been talking about here over the last several meetings.
Questions, comments from the board?
I guess I, as a developer myself, I understand the value point, but it's not our job here in this board to determine value. We should allow you to build 20 stories, then if you maximize the value, church will get as much money as possible. So I understand it, but land is only worth what you're able to build on it, and there are codes and that, so we need to leave the value portion out of this, because it's not relevant to the design.
Well, if I may, how is it not relevant when the impact of the review board is by fact affecting the value? So how do you separate those two conversations?
Ours is not zoning.
That's
it's
true,
affecting-
anything.
Zoning is affecting the value. If this was zoned 20 stories, it'd be worth more than what it currently is, because you'd have by right the ability to build it. We aren't changing the zoning, right? I mean, there is, I mean, we have to have a recommendation, but we're only part of that. We're charged with the design and does it fit in the area. And so I guess I step away from the whole value discussion, and I would just give my comment. I probably agree from my personal that scheme 1 is closer in terms of getting there. I think, the reduction in parking for me for scheme 2, the height that's required, I'm closer on scheme 1. I'm not saying it's there. I want to hear other opinions on that. But you know, it is what Susan said is something that I think have to be taken to heart, of how much was put into the overlay, and the zoning code was there, and the step down. And I just personally am not sure we're exactly there. That doesn't mean those rules don't bend, and that's, I think, what she even said, is that nothing's perfect. You can't take every piece of parcel, but to look at still the density on this site with it's comparable to what's on High Street. And I understand the economic, but that's not what we're here to. So.
Well, if I can respond, in regarding one of the comments Susan made about, you know, and I know this has come up on previous conversations about, you know, the density migrating eastward off of High Street kind of thing. I question a little bit. There's a 2-block area, and I'll say from 14th to 16th, that by planning has, what I'll say, in my opinion, has been intentionally set up for higher density development. And I know I brought that comment up, you know, last time at our meeting in the adjacent room about, you know, the zoning heights for those other parcels and such.
I think you are very correct. 14th to 16th in a defined area that was designed with it was not envisioned for this side of 16th. So I mean,
It's important to clarify, because you're correct there, an overall planning decision was made and it's been approved by this group and others, but that's public space. That's a public endeavor, and it's a public university. So all of the space and all of the artifacts that to date have grown the height on the east side of High Street are part of the public campus. So what you're bringing is a private endeavor, private market. And I think for me, there's a challenge. You are obviously looking at it from the point of view of the project that you want to achieve and make the profits and so on that aren't really our score. But I think what Susan articulated very well is that the planning process that has deep roots and a past and is geared toward future has to do with many people's ideas, many people's goals, community balance with university, balance with the city. And so what's happening with this particular site is it's challenging those things. And so a lot of people that see that challenge as being at risk of diminishing the quality of life for many other people who have chosen to be in that area because it has a certain character comes up. That becomes a conflict. Your project is the first one attempting to do this, and there are a lot of other proposals for development of existing parking lots, other housing that needs to be significantly repaired, so therefore may be demolished and get replaced with new housing buildings. Those conversations are going on. And so in the scope of the possibilities of those other works, all of them are being asked to respect the planning intentions to keep things scaled to the same domestic and residential scope as is current, and maintaining that zoning corridor, that higher scale and higher density corridor on High Street. So given that, again, I think it's, you see it from the point of view of one project. I see it from the point of view of multiple projects, wherein I don't want to see something that sets a new precedent that invites other projects off High Street to grow for a private interest to a height that's not compatible with the area. I think you have come back each time with certain aspects of the changes that have been responses to conversations we had at the prior meeting. But it seems that the one thing that I've heard at the end of each discussion is that it's too much, it's too dense for that site. And so that's the larger picture. And that's the part of it that's not really changing, right? You're not getting a significantly smaller building and less dense environment for that site, which is what I've heard my colleagues stress.
It's 60% smaller than our initial submission.
Hmm.
So it's almost cut in half.
And how about compared to last month?
It's
Well, scheme,
10, 15% smaller.
yeah, scheme two.
And I think, I think you put it there, is I think we as a board, if we take everything literal, right, you don't see that. I mean, I used another example that it was around High Street that it was 72 feet. We had multiple proposals that came at Lane and High that wanted to expand on it. And we said, hey, we think that, you can't take every parcel and say 72 feet is right, if we were willing to expand on that. And I think that's here, because I don't think anyone on board is saying, this is the max height, this is the max, this is it. But where we are, there's a general feeling that it's tipped too far one way, and that it has to be closer to what was recommended, not exactly. And that, at least, that's my opinion of where I say, that's why scheme one gets a little bit closer with it stepping down, the height in that area, but it's just not there.
I would agree. I think scheme one is lending towards the height difference. When I see not this image, but the other image, when it's adjacent to the duplex, scheme one is more in favor of sort of keeping that scale along 16. My preference would be that we'd be able to keep both duplexes. I think I'll let others really talk about more of the historic preservation aspects, but I think it's a valid point that preserving the other duplex and the integrity of the interior of the space that we've all been discussing is a really important aspect of this project that needs to be highly focused on. When I look at the 3/4 view that we had before, I'm not seeing how this, it's definitely a gesture in the right direction of keeping the 16th Avenue at a lower scale, but it's still not quite there. There's definitely more work needed on this.
I mean, we pretty much designed it exactly how KB kind of instructed us to at the last meeting, which is,
I should be getting paid.
Well, I appreciate where you're going. There's a lot of aspects about it that were addressed, but there are as many that perhaps weren't addressed as well.
like
What I'm seeing here. Just the way you come up on the why, and I would like to see that, there's an odd knuckle that happens that I don't understand from a height standpoint. It appears that both schemes have 345 beds. Is that where you need to be?
Yeah, I mean, we've reached kind of a point of no return on just the overall density, and kind of hearing your guys' concerns about that density. 345 is a very small student housing project. And just given the cost of land and the cost of everything that goes into developing a project now, today, and it's like extremely and only getting worse by the day. It becomes, very difficult. We're trying to squeeze, we're hearing you guys, and, you want a smaller footprint, you want, lower height, lower density. We're trying to make all those things happen in the way that is, aesthetically pleasing and hearing all of your hints as to, you can support 6 stories over here, but you just step down to 3 in the corner. We've really tried to sort of design around your comments, if that makes sense.
Let me ask you another question, and you were talking about the parking, and I understand that. I think we all are in agreement that that's one area that we perhaps could be a little bit more lenient on. Of the 345 beds, I mean, is this market rate student housing? Is there any like affordable housing component integrated into the design? Has that been thought about? How does that affect the performance?
Well, it isn't a CRA. We do intend to participate in the CRA program, which would mean us paying a fee into the fund.
So to be clear, you wouldn't provide any affordable units in this project, instead you would buy out.
Most likely, yes.
I'd also like to do a follow-up question to the one that Lori had, if that's okay. The follow-up question is like, how do you intend to ensure that the development contributes to the overall diversity and accessibility of the university district?
I would suggest that's really outside the purview for.
Is it the accessibility aspect of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to be mindful that the role of the board is to address the appropriateness of the project in terms of the aesthetics, the massing and scale of the project. And I think we need to be mindful of that. Our purview is the purview of the zone. There are things that we should recognize or not within.
Okay, let me reframe. Let me rephrase.
I'm sympathetic. I know what you're asking, how I'm sympathetic, but I think we need to be mindful of line review.
So then could I approach the community benefits that could potentially happen within this space? Is that an appropriate approach? So you had mentioned that like you're trying to expand the design, and I was wondering how can the community benefit from these designs, even though they're exclusive in your proposal? Like how can we make sure that they're also community driven as well?
Well, one of the things that I think we've discussed as an option for the church as they move away from the site is the appropriate to stand up, and this section right here, it says cafe study.
Can you turn that or no? Sorry. Okay, sweet, got it, yeah.
One of the things that we kind of discussed with the church is, a lot of we heard those comments before, previous meetings, that sort of make the building approachable from the streets, very prominent corner, we understand that. But making this available on Sunday mornings for church gatherings or, for anyone, really anyone that wants to come and, I don't think worship is the appropriate word, but to gather in that space. Something that we discussed with the church, it's something that they would be interested in.
It's a little ironic that the existing obvious gathering place, among other aspects of its significance, is being eliminated.
The existing gathering space is a defunct church that can't really operate anymore.
I think, and I sort of got to this a little bit last time. Just as a matter of respect for architectural heritage, let's not speak in the kind of dismissive way about what that interior is. If we're going to eliminate it, unfortunately, let's at least be respectful of it.
We're trying
I think
to.
we have.
Yeah.
Okay, but I mean,
I mean, I
it
hear what you're
is more than
saying.
a defunct church.
It's a great space. It has great elements and it's great materials. The church can't function in its former function, and therefore the boiler doesn't work. The buildings still have to function to have a congregation and things like that.
I'm not trying to create.
That's what I would say.
I'm just asking that we be aware of respectful of the architecture unfortunately is,
We are, I think the
jeopardy.
comment is relative to the structure at large.
I mean, it's tough, right? I think because, based on the discussion, we kind of know where the hot points are. I do agree. I think you've taken the comments from previous sessions and tried to integrate it in schemes. And I think my position is maybe kind of where Ryan is, which is, I think you worked hard at it. You're trying, I'm a little more on scheme 2 than scheme 1 because I get the sacrifices you make and everything's sort of push and pull and, a bit of a bargaining when you do this kind of thing. But the overall benefit to me is you retain the building on the east that's on the property that is a nicer, older building. And frankly, in terms of the benefit to the public, I view that as a bigger asset than the church interior. I mean, the interior is all right. I think retaining the one duplex unit on the east actually has a greater effect on the community. I think, I just want to express that the board is built into the zoning code. And a zoning code is a bargain made by a society to regulate the use of land. And inevitably in that bargain, there is sacrifice. I'm pretty sure I could monetize my property better if I started selling drugs. Laws and zoning exist, or liquor. The laws and zoning exist for the purposes of regulating land use for the benefit of the overall community. So the zoning code of the board as well exists to weigh the needs and benefits of an individual property owner against the larger community. And so I don't think we're here to push our own personal interests. I think we're here to enforce our responsibility as a mechanism for the zoning code. I think, and I agree with Ryan, and Ryan speaks as a developer, and I speak as an architect that works with developers. We're sympathetic, but it is not our role to make your pro forma pencil out. And I think you recognize there's an opportunity here to do something on the property, and you're hemmed in, as we all are, by construction escalation right now. But that's not something we need to solve.
No, and I appreciate your comment, about the zoning aspect of things, and I would agree that that is the purpose and work with many of the different commissions around town here.
Well, let me think. I mean, where I'm at, I can live with scheme 2. It's not perfect. It puts more height and more mass on the end of the site than I would like. But it's all a trade-off. And the trade-off for me is the duplex on the east is retained. I'd like to see a good faith effort to repurpose some of the historic elements of the church interior and use them in the common spaces and stuff, and I'm fine with that. But I think the challenge is you're going to have to convince the other folks on board.
Two things. First, one of the things that I think we've been trying to deal with and trying to address comments, a comment relative to the height of the building. Because there's been comments from the board about accepting a 6-story structure in part, or in part. But yet we still seem to be getting comments here today about height. And so from our perspective, what is the limit? I mean, what is acceptable? I mean, if 6 stories is not acceptable, what is? Because we hear one thing, but then we come back with a solution, we hear the same comment. Yet we're responding to direct comments from the board. So it's like, where do we go kind of thing? And, what's too much and what's enough? And so if anyone.
Well, I'll give you one more perspective. So I'm largely in agreement with Keone. And the reason I am is because if you go to the area, which we don't have to do, by the way, but just in terms of scale, and what really strikes me is if you look at the basically the scale of all the buildings around it, and I get the fact that you've got an odd shaped site, but it's a dramatic shift from your east section of your building to the existing duplex. I mean, a monumental shift. I don't care if it's 3 stories or 6 stories, just the bulk of the building in comparison to the look and scale of the neighborhood is dramatic at that juncture. So I'm very much in favor of saving the westernmost duplex building, even at the expense of the western part of your project getting taller. I have no issue with 6 stories if it's closest to High Street. I don't think you want that height that's more interior to the neighborhood. That's just my opinion. So I'm not bothered by additional height to the western part of your, to save the existing building and to make that end of your building a little bit more in keeping with the scale of the neighborhood. That's just my opinion.
Carry one, but I mean, that scheme 2 is 6 stories on the east side.
It is.
Scheme 2 is 6 stories on the east side.
It steps down to 4 at the street.
But as I pointed out last meeting, what you're doing is basically completely shading the rear yards of 6 units, 3 duplexes. So you're taking away a part of the quality experience of those 6 rental units. That's where your massing is, to me, not acceptable. It's one thing to try to address the street. And what I like about looking at the aerial is you do begin to understand fabric. Fabric meaning that you have buildings of a certain kind of density, quality. It's more than just porches or pitched roofs. It's a feeling of it's a sensibility about the nature of the individual artifacts. And when we look at what's happening with the building that you're designing in a series of kind of fragmented local symmetries around the boxes, as you have that 6-story piece in the back, you're completely shading those yards, 3 duplexes.
You're talking scheme 2, correct?
Well, both schemes, actually.
Could I pose a
Well,
question?
scheme 1 isn't 6-story on the eastern side.
Well, what I'm looking at in these 2 versions, the 2 versions of the massing, whether it's 5 or 6 stories at the eastern end of your project, is too tall to allow any sunlight into the backyards of the 3 duplexes.
Scheme 1 is actually 4 stories on that east side.
And the duplexes are 3 stories.
If I could just pose a question, and this could be to the applicant or to the board. This is just something that we as staff were discussing in reviewing this. Is there any feelings one way or another for, there's the 4-story element here, if that were reflected here? I don't know how many units or beds, I have no idea, I'm just throwing it out there, that would that be better or doable, that if this chunk right here, instead of being 6 stories, was the 4 stories like here, that way you still keep this duplex, but there's still a little bit of an additional step down, but you still maintain all of the height here. Is that?
I mean, if we could maintain the height of the corner and step it down back there, I think that's potentially, the 345 is kind of a general, is a bit of a general estimate. But we do need to be around 345, 350, and we would have to dig in even further and try to see if it's viable. But I do think it's a concession that if we could pick a scheme and say, everyone kind of agrees or says, hey, take this concept and move forward. I think that's something we could probably concess on.
So I do have a question, and I'm a little afraid to ask it, to be honest. I was reading through the city code, specifically the overlay section with the impact district. And in the section that's for the certificate of approval, it makes reference to, and please help me out here if I'm reading it correctly. It states that raising a structure within the district does not require an approval of appropriateness. It simply requires a demo permit. Is that correct?
That is correct, not best practice.
Understand, but that's what the code says, correct?
You're not the first applicant to ask that. You're in your rights to tear everything down on the site. But it's probably.
Once you purchase the site,
Once
you purchase the project, but your
Probably not
purchase
gonna
is
help your,
contingent on that,
it's not gonna help your case here.
right?
I mean, if you want to quote the design, the zoning code, the purpose of the board is to review any projects to, and I quote, preserve, protect, and enhance the urban environment and neighborhood characteristics of the university district. If you were to raise the site and then come to us with a development, I'm pretty sure we would take into consideration your previous actions.
I would expect that, yeah.
I mean, I think, your problem is there are 7 people, you need 4 votes. And, we're people, so we're not all gonna have a unanimous opinion. And I guess you gotta figure out how to, to do enough to get at least 4 people on your side. That's really what it comes down to.
Well,
I think what would be helpful to emanate off campus would be actionable steps. For example, on scheme 2 of what needs to change to get to approval.
All right.
What will make scheme 2 acceptable?
I'm gonna go with staff. Staff suggestion was scheme 2, 4 stories and be done, amended.
say that again.
Staff's suggestion for the discussion I think they were having in planning was scheme 2, but 4 stories on the east.
No, 5, well, maybe 5 on the.
1, 2, 3. Well, they're saying, well, this from scheme 1, put it here instead on scheme 2. So you want to do that for staff suggestion? I'm good.
2 stories? Sorry, second. Lop off 2 stories on that side, or like take it all the way to 4 there, or 5 in the corner?
So 4 is what, I guess I didn't realize that this chunk was 4. I didn't realize these chunks were different, so,
The top one is 3.
yes. 1, 2.
3 and 4 at the back.
Well,
Yes.
4 at the back,
3
3 at the front, right?
Yes, so
Yes.
that was the confusion. I think 4, and I'm totally speaking as myself now, because the rest of the team that we talked about this with is not here. But I think, 4 would be best, but I mean, you would be retaining basically your own unit here. So I think if at least a story got locked off of this, so it stepped more, I think that would be more supportable than, this.
I mean, and I just add one more, I mean, I don't want to take my comments that scheme 1's the only one that I think there are schemes within 2, like, 2, I can see that, hey, there is height in the back, but what I don't like about that is it's still 4 stories up front on a streetscape that's 3 stories.
I agree with that.
Could you have something where it's 3 stories, its height's in line with those duplexes, and then once you get past the footprint of the duplexes, it's higher. I'm less worried about the sun in the backyards, because I don't see the kids drinking there during the day as much, or they're drinking there at night. So I'm less concerned on that.
All the palm.
But that streetscape of if you're giving height, you're keeping the height up front, and so to my opinion, you were pushing on both limits, you're like 4, and we want 6 in the back. But if I could start to get on board with, hey, it's 3 for those footprints, move to the back, maybe it's 5, maybe it's 6, don't want you to quote me here, because you gotta see it. But that's where we start to move in the right direction, in my opinion.
That's kind of why we felt the first scheme accomplished that, but the sacrifice was the house.
It did, but then you still move to 4 on the next wing. Like, I mean, you're pushing, hey, that's what I do on plans. We're gonna push on it. I mean, I get where you're going, and we're trying to provide that feedback of, you can push limits, and at some point, hey, we find a compromise.
Well, as far as the step downs on scheme 1, coming from the north on Waldeck and going south and then east, we were obviously trying to find a sensitive way to step the building down and yet still address the street in an appropriate scale. So that's was the kind of underlying thought on how we
Maybe,
made those
Keone
moves.
and KB might have more. I mean, to me, it's always been, hey, what's behind you? Don't see that, so like 3 up front with a 6 is more impactful than this 4 step to 6. Like, I'd rather see that height a little bit further back, because you're just not gonna see that from the street.
Well, and I agree, and I think from perspectives that you're gonna, this is going uphill, right? So you're gonna see this building in a different way as you move up the hill. Scheme one is definitely more favorable because it has a more correlated language to the duplex. I'd prefer to have both duplexes there with scheme one and step that fourth floor back, as you suggested, either to the house, rear of the duplex, or even beyond 10 feet, 20 feet, whatever, to continue that L that's in the back that is 6 stories, which I think steps down at 4 stories at the very top corner. It's hard to tell up at that top corner. It looks like it steps down. Yeah, if you go up to the top one, see how it steps down right
Yeah,
there?
it does.
Maybe it doesn't, maybe that
All the way,
continues and that 3-story continues back to where that L steps down. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure. Yeah.
Bring
Yeah, there we go.
all the way to
There we go.
5 stories.
Yep.
So allow this to be 3 further back, so you're gaining your density further back here.
Yes.
You're losing it more up
But
front.
in that scheme, we're losing the duplex, so it's
Yeah.
sort of,
Well, the goal would be to keep the duplex, but
okay.
marry those two ideas. And I understand this is difficult and we're throwing a lot at you, and I don't know that it's our job really to design the project, but is to offer suggestions as to what might be more acceptable to the board for future development is an option.
I appreciate that, Lori, on specific comments for John to work with. Could we hear from all the board members on what are the points John needs to address? So when we're back, hopefully you're all saying, yeah, you got it.
I mean, for my part, it's that. I mean, I really would like to see the duplex saved, and I misspoke earlier about the height of the building on the east, but if you do what we suggest, you can save that. Maintain 3 about the depth of the duplexes, and then a 6-story bar connects to the back to the east. I'm okay with that.
And when you say bar, that 6-story going all the way to the eastern wall,
Correct. But just the back portion of it.
Yeah.
that leg, that one leg.
Yeah.
The double-loaded corridor.
I agree with you about saving the duplexes. I'm going to risk saying what I hope doesn't sound disrespectful, but what I really would like to see after this much discussion is for you to come back with telling us what you want to do, as opposed to asking us what we want you to do.
Well, we did. We started off the conversation.
No, there are options.
Saying
I mean, I
option
would
one.
really like to have, at this point, I'd like to be looking at a proposal to comment on, as opposed to, I'd like to see what you want to do.
Option one.
Okay, so
Okay.
Well, no, I don't mean to be, I'm sorry.
I agree with this, and I want to say a little bit differently, because I think what happens is you start to get designed by committee, and it's a wedge of cheese, and you start cutting it different ways, but it lacks character. I think Ryan said something earlier that I wanted to underscore. When we were working on other projects, in this case at Lane and High, the problem wasn't the limitation of the zoning envelope, or that zoning had all the answers and we were going to smush as much as one can within that, regardless of its aesthetic or the other values that it attempts to achieve with an suggestive architectural facade. And this way of making architecture is not familiar to me, that you start with a box and you talk to a bunch of people and you move things around. I would love to have I would be very interested in seeing an architectural idea. And by that, I mean, 16th Avenue has a quality of space that's longer than the short piece that we're looking at. What does 16th Avenue look like elsewhere? Are there other streets in the area that you find admirable where there's been new interventions that work well with historic fabric? And I would call on the Evans Scholar House as one place where there's a good example of that right up 16th. So 16th Avenue, it offers an opportunity. Waldeck is a different environment, and you have the institution of the Presbyterian Church. Are there things that you might do that would recognize the virtues of that? I think right now the houses across Waldeck that are owned by Hillel are maintenance deferred and don't have the same integrity as, for instance, the duplexes. Can you find other things about here? And I'm not suggesting that you make a pastiche or a little of this, a little of that. I'm suggesting as architects, you have more cojones to make something that's a really strong work of design. And that might mean a series of row houses on 16th with an 8-story building on Waldeck. I don't know, that's up to you. But what I'm saying is I'm concerned about when I hear my colleagues talk about the overdensity and too much stuff, which we recognize. I think Susan was most articulate that this is pulling something that belongs on the urban corridor of High Street into the neighborhood. So at that point, that's a hurdle to overcome. But if you can show us a work of architecture, really great work of design, that is a strong sensibility about how you understand the neighborhood and what the future of the neighborhood could and should look like, I'd be very interested in talking about that. I think we're not going to end up with a very successful project. We keep whittling and smushing and growing and just continuing to take what you have like a piece of Play-Doh and oozing it around different ways so you get 345 beds. To me, that's not a process for making architecture. And there's so much great architecture in this neighborhood that it's really disappointing to me to think about bringing in something that's generic, that looks like things that we've seen elsewhere, that has poor quality construction, just so you can get enough beds on the site to make it pencil out.
Well, I would disagree that this is generic because this is a very custom building to fit this particular site. You know, one of the design moves that we made early on was breaking down the massive building on both Walnut and on 16th by creating those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different facades along that vary in size and in scale. So the whole idea with that was to try to get a street rhythm. If you remember me having that conversation with you in previous meetings.
And you and I might not agree on this, John, but what I'm saying is, as a design process, come back with something innovative, come back with something that's significantly different, as opposed to getting each person to weigh in on a height. I think that that's not going to produce a very successful project. And I, for one, am not likely to support that when it comes to the certificate of support. You know, if you might somewhere in the process really convince me that the design is extremely strong, but I'm not hearing you talk about the ideas of anything that works in favor of contributing to increasing the quality of architecture in this neighborhood, which is featured for its.
Well, with all due respect.
The other thing I'd like to say is that Susan very articulately talked about the problem of the church interior, and there's clearly very different points of view about that. You've talked about it since it's an interior, it doesn't really relate. I am very disappointed to see you basically stealing somebody else's windows and pastiching on the facade. I would much rather have you say you've got an idea about taking those elements and keeping them as historic artifacts. Have you heard back from Rolf?
No.
You tried to contact him again?
I have not.
Because I would support the integration, keeping the value of that work of modern architecture somewhere, somehow together, and not trying to reuse it as coffee house windows.
I would agree with KB.
I mean, we've reached out to, you know, the group in Minnesota. We've reached out to Rolf. You know, they aren't responding the same oomph that you guys are. So it's kind of hard, frankly.
Well, and, you know, I understand your comment, but with all due respect, you know, the conversation about the process has not passed the massing of the building. So to a large degree, you know, we've looked at the configuration and what fits on the site and trying to break the building down to address the massing of it. But as far as the architecture and the detailing of it and what does this look like, you know, the exterior lighting, interiors and all this, you know, we haven't gotten there. You know, we turned this around in a week, you know, to simply try to keep the conversation going and try to get to a consensus. And I understand design by committee, it's painful. But at the same time, we have to respond to you and we have to ask for your approval. So getting your input in the process is really critical. Otherwise, you know, we're shooting in the dark if we don't, you know, have this kind of dialogue that advances the conversation. So I understand you have a certain level of disappointment. I think on this side of the table, we have a certain level of disappointment because we're trying to get to a solution based upon comments that we hear from the group. And that's why I kind of started the conversation with, we need to get to a decision and that everybody can work with, because then we can move forward. And we would be happy to engage the board on, I know we have to, but we would be more than willing to have design charrettes or intermittent design meetings outside of this formal process. or as a part of this process, whatever's appropriate. But to engage the group to further advance the design, because it is a monumental site. It is really important to get it right. And to have that kind of input gets buy-in, it gets participation. And Tim, you know, if I can use that Fifth Avenue as an example, that's kind of how we worked with the community on that particular project. Where, you know, you guys came into our office and, you know, we shared the design with you. You were part of the selection of the brick and the colors and everything. That was intentional. And
There was a basic concept that was presented to the neighborhood, and the neighborhood did not, the neighborhood had something more to respond to rather than simply choices. And I think, I go back to the way that KB began her very articulate statement of saying, bring something in. And I think that's a restatement of what I'm saying. Tell us what you want. I really want to, I want to respond to something as opposed to responding to choices.
No, but I mean, in fairness to them, they need to have some understanding of parameters. I mean, okay, if Grand Poolhouse came in with like a 20-story beautiful work of architecture, I would still shoot it down. I mean, it's not, there is an amount of mass involved that fits on the site, and they need an architectural idea, but they have to start with some sort of understanding of what kind of mass involved is going to be acceptable so they can get to an architectural idea.
What they keep hearing and what we keep saying is this amount of architecture doesn't fit well for that site.
Yeah, so
Doesn't fit.
yeah, and so I think they're trying to figure out how much to whittle down.
We've also heard too much height, too much density, and then you just throw out like, what about 8 stories here? I mean, you know, we
Okay, so
guys are
we're
bored.
going to talk in
Eat your
circles here,
pie.
so I need to wrap this thing up. So,
yeah, we are.
so in a nutshell, I think.
Let me just ask one thing. Have you heard clear opinions from all 7 members? Not consensus, clear opinions from each member.
we feel we've tried to address many of the opinions we've heard. I'm not really sure. I mean, we're trying to get acceptance from the board, right?
Yeah, I don't think you're gonna get acceptance from all 7. You need acceptance from 4.
Right.
And I guess what I'm asking you is, have you heard clear opinions from each individual member of the board so that you can figure out how to get to where you need?
We have not heard from Emma, aside from the, you know, her comment about.
Trying to figure out what how to bring the community together.
And once we have a concept, you know, that's acceptable to 4 of you, we can get more artistic with our ID. We can show you, you know, our intentions with these materials, which we think are special, and we do genuinely want to preserve them. It's just, we can't get off first base.
I appreciate your question, and I thank you for that. In response, the one comment that I think I have heard, maybe not from everybody, but from a couple of the people, is that on scheme 2, that if we take that upper 1 or 2 floors on that leg of that building, that solves the issues. Not architecturally, but massing wise. So I would like to ask, is that a fair understanding of what I've heard from the group?
I think it goes, for me, it does. I can't speak to Ryan, but I think he seemed to be headed in that direction.
I feel it's too tall against the duplexes. I think you need to be scheme 1 on the height back to that back level. Because that's 3 stories. If you look at perspective, it's better married to that duplex. And if we keep the duplex, that's what I'd want to see. If it was 4 stories, I wouldn't be supportive.
So your opinion is to.
Yeah, I need 3 stories next to that and keep the duplex on that particular leg of the
Right, I
building.
understand, but I just want to be clear, your opinion is to not extend the 6th story to the eastern wall, but to.
No, I didn't say that. I said I wanted to see the 3 stories next to a duplex that is kept.
I'm gonna say Lori's tougher here than I am, so you make her happy.
I just want to be clear, you know, because we have 3, well, 1, 2, 3, I'm sorry. 1,
That's
2, 3,
4
4.
on the
Yeah,
lower level.
understand.
See what I mean?
Yeah.
So
So just,
And keep the duplex.
are we
And
talking
take it
about,
down back to the leg.
apologies, Lori, but, are we talking about that little nub, yeah, that she's pointing at, carve that off, or does it need to go?
No, it needs to go back, as we discussed before.
This corner, right?
Yeah.
So on that eastern leg, you're okay with
Yeah,
3 and 4 story? 3 at the front, 4 story in the back, or
6 in the back.
6 in the
6 in
back,
the back.
3 in the front?
yes.
Got it. So no 4 story on that leg.
No,
See, we did look at that and we felt it uncomfortable go from 3 to 6.
well. If it's really good architecture, it probably would work.
Touche.
Just to clarify, we're talking, keep the duplex, 3 stories along 16th, and that steps back to this corner. And the 6-story portion could go over to here,
It could,
because that is behind the depth of the duplexes.
Correct.
And a little bit
it's
of the
actually
back.
not, if we look at the site plan next to it.
So you have to make that work, right? It's gotta be the duplex. Or do you think we've all talked about that before?
You can't bring six stories all the way to the east end.
I'm sorry, Mr.
And
Cohen.
again,
You can't bring 6 stories all the way to the east end of your last floor. And, one way you could help solve the problem for yourself to understand is to draw the section through there, draw the section through the yards of the buildings in the back and show the sun angles and show the impact.
well, I don't think that plan matches the rendering.
It does, this is the old site plan,
Completely.
yeah,
That's scheme 1.
the old scheme one,
Yeah.
yeah.
Right, but you can draw the plan that shows the duplexes, you can draw the section through, show the heights, show those relationships. The more information you bring in and the more studies you do, you're doing it for yourself to defend the ideas that you want. You help yourself by showing those representations to us, because then we can see what you're going for. We're having a lot more conversation than we should have on something that is too schematic. I understand what you're doing. You want to get incrementally things that you can improve along the way, because it's a lot of work to do. But I think if you do the work, you'll have a more satisfying experience with us, because we'll see what your intentions are. We'll see why you value doing it that way.
I just want to clarify, because I think I'm hearing some conflicting about where the 6 stories can stop. Understanding that this is not current, is that if we're down to 3 stories all the way back to, essentially beyond the back of the duplex, are they able to take 6 stories over to?
Steph, I think we shouldn't be answering that for them in the abstract. They're architects, they make the drawings, they figure it out. And when they draw it, they will figure out, that's a good idea, they're gonna like that, or that doesn't quite work, we're gonna work. So rather than us stating and having in minutes, this is the right answer, right? Doesn't it make sense, John, that you can make the studies, figure out what's gonna work well, and then we'll have a much more productive dialogue.
Right, because we need to have a plan drawing that matches the rendering. I mean, it's difficult to do this in piecemeal, because I
I just want to clear, we're saying could potentially
It
support. Could potentially be supportable, obviously, depending on how it shakes out. Right, I'm not saying that that is definitely the answer. I just want to make sure that they are hearing that
It
potentially.
goes back to Amy's idea of creating, townhouses along 16th and an 8-story in the back. Could be that. I mean, we don't know that, right? But what we're saying is we definitely want the 16th facade to respect the neighborhood that it's being presented adjacent to.
I mean, I'm gonna say yes, I think, process, blah, 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 blah. But I think if that is fixed, and to Lori's suggestion, that's 3, that's gonna go a lot further at getting 4 votes, which is
I guess, Carrie, do you need to wrap up the meeting?
Yeah, I'm personally done.
Well, I just,
Been asked by our leadership to try to keep discussions
Sure,
20 and 30 minutes. This has now been an hour on your project.
yeah, well,
Well, it's a big project.
we're done. I just want to say thank you for the specific comments. And, every large development project I've been involved with on the zoning aspect that's come to this board has gone through 2, 3, 4, 5 meetings to get to some consensus of this is approvable. And then that's when John's real work starts.
Yeah.
So,
If you're sticking to the zoning code, it goes quicker. The problem is when you're trying to push the envelope like this one is, you gotta expect it. You're gonna have to put more time in.
And that's fine. I mean, we're obviously been willing,
yep,
so.
very good.
Thank you very much.
All right,
Thank you.
thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Anything of note on the staff applications that
I love the sign next to McDonald's. Oh, my goodness sake. You looked up?
No.
No, but oh, man, gotta show just for Carrie's benefit. It's the best, we've approved this sign over and over and over again, this is the best one yet. We don't get to approve it. That's
to McDonald's.
Oh, wow.
The irony was not lost on us either.
We feel just like you, go vegan for life.
Next to McDonald's.
Huh? Right. How soon might it go up?
I don't think so.
Can we call a meeting?
We do have a couple other things.
Okay.
We need to do the, we need to adopt the staff approvals into the record, and then we have that item of other business talking about submission requirements for approving applications.
First things first, would you like a motion?
Yeah.
I make a motion that we approve the staff approvals.
Second.
There's a motion by Ms. Jones, seconded by Mr. Sublette, is that correct? Okay, Mr. Fleming,
Yes.
Ms. Gundelman,
Yes.
Ms. Jones,
Yes.
Ms. Parker,
Yes.
Mr. Reeves.
Yes.
Mr. Sublette.
Yes.
And we lost Ryan, so motion carries. Okay. Let me get rid of some of this stuff here. Okay. Yes. Can you leave me alone? Yes. So, we have, I added as an item of other business, submission requirements for approving cases. So this came, as a result of there being some confusion around the request for 30% construction drawings and folks not being exactly clear about what that meant. So we as staff worked to come up with a specific list of materials that would be required if an applicant is coming to us expecting us to vote on their case. That we would need to see this level of detail. So I wanted to propose this as kind of a starting point, and you all look at it. If there's anything that you think is excessive, please let me know. If there's anything that you think is missing, and then ultimately we could come to a consensus that this looks okay, or with any modifications, I would like to take it back to Mark Gravillis to make sure that, you know, if we did make any changes, that he's on board with it, and then start relaying this information to our applicants so that they're not feeling taken off guard by like that, you know, we're expecting something they didn't know they needed to deliver.
I mean, generally, it looks pretty good. I'll read through it, but I think the concern I've had is if you only require elevations and renderings, there's an enormous distance between that and what you're gonna build. And it introduces a lot of risk that what gets built doesn't look anything like the rendering.
I agree with him.
So this seems like a pretty solid list of kind of things. And I was the one that said 30% construction documents, but it's sort of just a shorthand way of saying fairly detailed drawings that gives us assurance of what's going to be built. So yeah, looks good.
Okay. I know we have at least one set of applicants that is anxiously awaiting this list of things. So if there's no red flags, and you all could bless me in giving this to them, that would be wonderful, because they do want to come to the November meeting. So if there's no red flags or anything on here, you'll see that we do have asterisks next to landscaping and lighting. I think that's pretty standard across the boards and commissions that folks may have not figured all that out yet by the time they're asking for initial approval. And in that case, we would just recommend the condition that they go back.
And Steph, that's what I was gonna ask, is this similar to what other neighborhood design groups?
Not
have?
Sherman Village.
Okay, so what, how is it working for the village?
Oh, we have to give them complete drawings
Okay.
of what we're doing.
Like 100%
We-
CDs.
We
Yeah,
think
100%.
100% CDs before I would actually issue the COA.
Right.
But in
Which is
this,
standard.
yeah.
The challenge is, like, sometimes 30% CDs to me is just a push on design development. And sometimes there's a lot of things that just haven't been worked out yet with structural coordination or mechanicals or whatever, and all of a sudden the building is, I don't know, it's not what we thought it was, and now we've got to make a lower ceiling, and we have to have, I don't know, we can't make it up right now, but canopies aren't well detailed at this point in my experience. Definitely needing to understand material details and how they adjoin one another. Because I think that can get lost very fast, like they don't really have it figured out. They know they want to use a certain material at the base and a certain material in the field, but they don't know what that detail looks like yet. Those things never get worked out at 30% CDs. It's one of the last things you do in your wall section. So that's my own concern.
And you're saying they're important, so. for us
They are
to-
important, I think, for
Yeah.
aesthetics.
I was, yeah, I mean,
So how do you solve that? I
But
mean,
I'd just be specific with the last, like it says window, door, and front wall details, but I would probably say something more like, you know, representative exterior details of, you know, aesthetically contributing components such as window, heads and sills,
Mhm.
corners of building or whatever. I mean, I guess my suggestion is give us a month to look it over. But I think you could tell next month's applicant that in general, this represents kind of what we're looking.
this is a draft.
I think that's a very good approach.
Yeah, I
This
think-
is general for the short-term need, but to give us a chance to review this more carefully.
Yeah, before we implement it, yeah.
If you could, in your review, you want to just email me any questions, thoughts, anything you think we should take out, that would be appreciated. And I think that's it.
Thank you for putting this together.
Yes.
Yes. I move that we adjourn. I can't make a motion.
I will move for you that we adjourn.
I second.
All right, we stand adjourned at 5:34.
Yay.
Lovely.
So, thank you. Jack. See you in a little bit.
YouTube over.
1 second.